I'm Dmae Lo Roberts, and welcome everyone to the Oceania celebration. It's a co-production of Theatre Diaspora and MediaRites. We're featuring the film production of Stories of Oceania, which will be available for viewing starting today, November 20th through December 4th, 2021, as a special 2-week virtual engagement. Stories of Oceania is a 1-hour production produced by the Honolulu Theatre for Youth. See the link in this event page, as well as the comment section, to find out how you can view this beautiful production of inspiring personal stories of Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian youth. We're so fortunate to have with us today 3 of the writers, creators, and actors of Stories of Oceania. And I'm very excited to talk with all of them. We'll be talking about the development of this work and what it represents to us. With us are Moses Goods. Hello, Moses.
Hello, my kapu.
Moses Goods is an artistic associate with Honolulu Theatre for Youth and one of Hawaii's most prominent theater makers. Originally from the island of Maui and now based in Honolulu, he has traveled nationally and internationally performing his original work, which he strongly roots in Native Hawaiian culture. As a writer, Moses has penned 13 full-length plays and dozens of short theatrical storytelling pieces. And I also want to mention, because I'm a fan, that Moses is a recurring character in this first season of NCIS Hawaii. Yay! It's such a good show. I had to put that in there. So it's great to see you every week. And so also joining us is Sean Joseph Choo. Hi, Sean.
Hello.
It's so good to meet you. Sean is an actor, composer, and writer at Honolulu Theatre for Youth, and Sean is dedicated to the stories and people of Hawaii. And as an actor, Sean recently guest starred as Penna on Magnum P.I. So we have another star here, yay! Sean is also a composer, and he was commissioned this past spring to write a song about the great Patsy Mink for Theater Works USA. His writing is currently part of the inaugural 2021 Creative Lab Hawaii Playwrights Immersive Program. And Sean is a member of the Dramatists Guild, ASCAP, the Consortium of Asian American Theater and Artists, and the Playwright Development Committee at Kumu Kahua Theater in Honolulu. So great, yes. And also I'm so happy to introduce Pōʻai Lincoln. She was born and raised in Waimea on Hawaii Island, and she is a company actor at Honolulu Theatre for Youth and is a professionally trained musician who focuses on the perpetuation of Hawaiian music and styles and history. And she is a storyteller who is keenly aware of how word choice influences the audience and how the perspective of the storyteller informs the narrative. Pōʻai, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Aloha, it's wonderful to meet you as well.
So it's an esteemed panel, and I'm eager to dive into this discussion. And first off, what I would like to find out from each of you is your experiences. What was the process for writing Stories of Oceania, and how did you select the stories that you wanted to tell?
In 2012, I was part of the delegation that went to the Festival of Pacific Arts in the Solomon Islands. Now, the Festival of Pacific Arts is every 4 years. It's a gathering of all the peoples of Oceania, sharing their, our culture, our art, our stories, and it's just an incredible gathering and a huge gathering. So in 2012, I was part of the delegation where our po'o, our kumu, put the bid in to have the 2020 Festival of Pacific Arts in Hawaii. So that's kind of when it first started, just getting things in motion. Fast forward to 2016, when it was in Guam, it was confirmed that the next one would be in Hawaii. So the 2020 Festival of Pacific Arts would be held here, first time ever. And once we heard that at HTY, we decided that we wanted to create a piece to go along with that 4 years later, because this is back in 2016, right? So we decided back then that we wanted to have a piece to showcase and be a part of this wonderful celebration, connecting people from all over the Pacific. And we had no idea what it would be about, because again, this is years before. We just knew we wanted to have it, and we needed a name because we started to put the word out there. So we chose Stories of Oceania, kind of kept it broad because we could go in any direction. And the way HTY works with our shows, most of our shows are very collaborative and largely devised. So there's some sort of devising that happens in almost every production that we do. This one, what we do is when we decide we do it, we kind of table it for a while, and then we'll come back to it periodically and have discussions about what it could be. And during those discussions, it was decided that the four of us, myself, Pōʻai, Sean, and Maki'ilei, who's not here today, would be the ones sort of heading this project. Now, but one thing to be aware of for us was that we are all Native Hawaiians, and we're doing a show called Stories of Oceania. And that's something we had to, be mindful of, because we're not going to assume that we have the right to tell anyone else's story. So we had to discuss, among ourselves, what the stories would be like, what would be appropriate, how we would be able to talk about all the other stories of Oceania, being that we are for Native Hawaiians. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to someone else that wants to pick it up and talk a little bit about how that went.
As y'all were talking just now, I was just thinking about, like, my brain thinks super woo space level. And I was just thinking how the process really started with our ancestors, like these stories, it did not begin with us. We're just entering into a stream of aloha and like a river of archives of stories that we're just kind of redirecting to like feed into like the farm or the plants, whatever. And I really, anytime I think about this project, I get very emotional because, and also that's my grandpa right there. My ancestors are around me. I have pictures of my family I just put up in my apartment. And, but yes, that's a big picture. But what Moses was saying, yes, all of our projects were very devised and collaborative. And one thing I just wanted to highlight was last fall, when we really started kicking things off into development and production and writing, we had a whole group of people supporting us that were major leaders, artistic indigenous leaders that are in our community, in our extended Ohana family in Hawaii. And man, it was so wonderful to just talk to them and listen to them and hear their stories that informed our stories.
Absolutely. I love that image, Sean, the stream that we have joined. These stories exist way before and beyond us. And one of my favorite things of this process, and as both of them said earlier, H2I is so unique with that so many of our pieces are devised and working together and working with our community. So it was a really amazing process working with some of our elders in the community to share and discuss what does it mean to be us telling these stories, because it is a lot. That's a huge, just stories of Oceania. Oceania is huge, and our cultures we are linked by the ocean, but we're all so very, very unique. And we really wanted to make sure that we were honoring all of those unique stories. And one of my favorite things that ended up happening, aside from the meetings that we had early on with our kupuna, the others, was just diving in on our own personal research to go and find stories. And we all ended up going into different directions. We would assign from each other, like, where in Oceania are we going to go next? And I got to find just these absolutely beautiful stories of people's connections to their ancestors and to their land and to the animals around them, and specific stories, just even in the Micronesian islands, such specific stories to each island and each tribe and each village on each island. And this sense of deep pride and familial connection to the land and to the animals there. And on one hand, it was so heartening because we have that here in Hawaii, and there are so many similarities between us and our cousins in the South Pacific, and yet we're each of us so very, very unique. And it was a wonderful project to both highlight the similarities and honor the unique parts that make Oceania.
I could just jump back in to connect both of the things that you two were saying. Sean, thank you so much for saying that The story began, thousands, millions of years ago with our ancestors. And that is so true. And that actually was sort of what guided us through this, knowing that we have a connection with our cousins all throughout Oceania. And like Pōʻai said, there are so many similarities and so many differences, but there are also, when we decided that this piece needed to be about what connects us and how we are connected, an exercise that we did was to delve into and talk about ways that we are disconnected, because over the thousands of years we have become disconnected in many ways, and to understand what that is and to explore that, which the show does to a degree. So we definitely went back to the beginning when our ancestors knew each other, and like in the story, if you see it, or if you just read what happened in history from our mo'olelo, our stories, you know that our ancestors were able to go throughout Oceania, the Pacific. It was a super highway, right? The ocean connected all of us, and we were one time like a big, huge family, but then we were disconnected, right? And so we wanted to talk about what are the many things that disconnected us, so we can understand how important it is to reconnect. So yeah, we sort of went way back to our ancestors in that time when we were all one big ohana.
Yeah, it sounds like it was very much collaborative, but also inclusive of elders and cultures, so that you could represent everybody, so authentically. And was there ever a moment that, I don't know, an elder or somebody from a culture that wasn't yours would say, I don't think that would reflect well, or that is something that would be representative? Was there kind of a give and take about some of the stories, or did you interview people?
Yes and yes. Again, getting back to that, that we're for Hawaiians telling these stories. It was essential that we reach out to different communities and different elders and different people that know the stories that we're trying to tell. And so just one in particular, Mama Inocenta Saunkiku, who is of the Chukis community, but is a very highly respected elder just in our community here in Hawaii. So many people know about her. I'm sure you probably have come across her name, if not met her. So Maki'ile, who is not here, the fourth person of our team, has a very strong pilina or connection with Mama Ino. And she went to her with everything, with all the stories that we thought we could tell. Many of them, of course, didn't make it into the final piece, but she wanted to make sure that whatever we put on there was put by through Mama Ino, to make sure that she's okay with it, because again, we're not of that culture. So making those connections were just, we wouldn't have done this without making those connections with people of those communities.
Well, Stories of Oceania really does feel like a film. It's beautifully shot, and there is such depth to not, to the stories, of course, but also to the way the stories are told, and they're very personal as we meet several youth, talking about their cultures. And I get the sense too that it might have originally been a stage production. I mean, talk about sort of the evolution of how it became to be a film.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. So initially we were just kind of throwing, ideas at the wall, kind of sharing sketches of things we've written based on assignments Moses might give us, or topics or themes. One thing to note is that as we were producing this, we were also producing, or in the middle of producing, The Highway, our TV show that we started when this whole pandemic season began. So we kind of were already in the middle of learning how to screenwrite, write for this other medium. But we also had the assistance of seasoned filmmakers, Gerard Elmore and Chesley Cannon, who gave us so much support and so much training. And Chesley filmed all of Stories of Oceania, and he was a theater major, I believe, and also is just like a puppeteer, and apparently a great actor. I heard he just can do everything. So I think it was really helpful to have someone who has that background film this show. And I think the concept, correct me if I'm wrong, Moses or Pōʻai, was that like we were going to film this as if it was filmed theatrical production. So the black box feel, the using the table as like the only kind of prop, essentially, bare minimum, leaving the mind to imagine, fill in the spaces, is kind of where we landed, I suppose, aesthetically.
Absolutely. We so the Highway, which is our television show, which came about as a result of the pandemic, because we couldn't do live theater. We had to figure out how to do TV. So we actually have a television show that's still airing, and we're still creating it, that is made for television. Which, by the way, we won 3 regional Emmys for, which blew our minds that we were theater makers, that now we have Emmys. We don't even know what that means, but we're getting better at it. But we felt that this piece needed to feel like theater. So if you look at the Highway, it's made for television, it's meant to, but Oceania feels like it's not just a production for the screen, but also feels like you could be on a stage as well.
I can jump in and just give another shout out to Chesley, who's not here with us. In a previous panel, he shared something that like stuck with me so well. There is such using the camera, using film as a tool to further create within it, instead of feeling like we were just capturing a production. We weren't just acting on stage. And a part of that too is because this was pretty early on in the pandemic when media was allowed to come back in, and we had special exceptions to be together and film together, but we had to film separately. We were not in the same shots together. There is no point in which any of us are actually on the screen together, which is, well, there's a couple of there's a bracelet being put on and like a couple of things like that. But it was restricting in so many ways. And what Chesley has said is that there's also a freedom within that, and using the camera and using our single set, that one table, everybody used the same table. And we built a world just in that one space, which is something that we do on stage in a theater all the time. And it was a really neat moment for me. So I'm still so new to a lot of this, but that there is that place where these worlds can converge, both creating very unique theater on stage where we are convincing our audience to follow through with us and believe that this stage is something else. We do the same exact thing in film. And so that was something that Chesley was really able to do successfully, I feel, in this show.
This is also good. Yeah, congrats on the Emmy. That's amazing. I'm that's really wonderful. But I'm also amazed that you were not in the same room together, because the film makes it seem like you are. So I'm delighted to find that out. I really felt like you were together. So that's speaks to how well the work was, both filming but also your acting. So that's amazing. I also just want to ask you all, since you all were in it, how was the process for you to sort of channel your inner child to play youth or young people?
I think a huge part for me is I have to mahalo Eric Johnson, artistic director at HCY. There's one thing he says a lot. He has a phrase of having a big heart when we're performing on stage. And in the context of like, if a child, say we're doing a very interactive show and some kids are not responding, or they're maybe being belligerent in some ways, and he would say, you have to have a big heart to your audience, and even to each other, as coworkers, right? Like maybe someone is going through something and you just don't know. So having the perspective that our young people are also fellow human beings that have their own opinions and thoughts, and especially, when they're getting to middle school age, those thoughts are maturing. They're becoming very their own person. So I think the approach to how we do a lot of our shows is indebted to that kind of vision that Eric has. And, you know, a lot of reflecting. I'll speak for myself. I don't know about Mo, you or Pōʻai, but, you know, just trying to remember, like, what was it like when I was in middle school? It was kind of a weird time. I still kind of have those kind of weird times where I feel awkward about things, you know, but so maybe it wasn't that far of a leap of the imagination, but, you know, and also for me personally, I think I really connected with Kapili, and I have a sticker over here that says his name and the little thoughts from the production I just realized I have right there. And you know, I'm very mixed race. I'm like 8 different ethnicities or something, and I never really connected with my Hawaiian side like Kapili, and kind of discovered things later in life, and so it was kind of not that hard in that aspect of the character to kind of get into that, and in fact, it was exciting. So I think I hope that kind of translated onto the screen with my character in performance.
I think I was focusing so hard on my accent. I did voice as mom as well, but I didn't have to be on screen for that. But the character Manu that I got to play, that I wrote for and then ended up playing, I had such joy playing her, and I was listening, like every time we would do a cut, I'd like put like another video of Rachel House just being her, like answering, like she was like not even acting anymore. I was like watching interviews that she held because she's just so funny. And I think I allowed myself to just not be afraid. And part of it too is that Manu's character is really charismatic. It's like comes in out of nowhere and it's like, I got everything already. she was really fun and courageous. And a big part of that was both Moses and Chesley being there and just letting me be silly and just letting me go for it, and feeling fully supported as an actor, that I wasn't making a caricature out of anything. I was just channeling my inner child and through Rachel House's voice.
Yeah, that's actually really important. That, you know, not to, what am I trying to say? To respect these kids, right? And to not underestimate what they're able to take in. You know, we are Honolulu Theater for youth. So we do theater for youth, but we are adults that very often have to play children. So this is just something that we've been doing for a long time. Our longest running member, current member, has been with HCY for decades, and he himself is pushing 60. But you see him on stage, and you don't know that, you know, through the magic of theater and through his skill as an actor, which is excellent. He's able to play a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, an ant, a cockroach, and it's, you know, it's that suspension of disbelief that happens in the theater, right? That magic, and also taking it seriously and not playing down, not making it a caricature. You know, these are real human beings, you know, because that's what children are, right? They're real human beings, and so we have that respect for them. So we approach it that way.
That's wonderful. I'm always in favor of extending your youth as long as possible, especially the longer you age. So it's great to hear, you know, that, you know, somebody who's in their 60s could be playing a young person. So that's great. So I'm also interested in your origin stories as actors, as writers, as you know, musician, composers. What was your motivation for working in theater, music, film, or television? Moses, do you want to start? I'm also interested in your motivation for creating your solo shows too.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's go way back. If you want origin stories, my origin stories go way back to when I was a child, and I was both an extremely introverted child and a child that had a huge imagination. So I like to talk about, you know, my origin stories happen in the forest and in the chicken coop. we lived upcountry Maui next to a forest, and we also had animals, right? And I was a super shy kid, and I would never talk to people. I would never go into the store to buy things. But at home, you know, in the forest or in the chicken coop, I came alive because I could let my imagination go, and my audience were the chickens, and I would have them, you know, there would be different scenarios and things that would happen. It would be just me and the chickens. I'd be performing to them and whatnot. And that was my safe place where I could let this creative energy go, and also in the forest. But not around people until I discovered theater. And so one of the big things for me was, you know, with theater, at least in those early stages, I could completely become someone else, and I was no longer Moses in front of these people. So I could inhabit these people and these characters and let that creativity just soar. So that's sort of the beginning of things. You wanted to find out about my solo performances. So when I finished at the University of Hawaii and decided that I was going to have a career in acting, I quickly found that the roles available and the stories being told weren't necessarily the ones that I wanted to be telling for the rest of my life. As if I'm going to commit to doing this for the rest of my life, I want to connect with the work that I'm doing. But I didn't feel like I was represented on stage, you know. And the only way around that was for me to make that happen and change the landscape, at least for myself, and hopefully for, you know, the rest of the community eventually. So that's when I became a writer. Actually, I became a writer out of necessity, because the plays that I wanted to perform in, the stories that I wanted to tell, not enough of them were out there.
Okay, so I grew up, as you said, I grew up on Hawaii Island in Waimea, and I come from a music family. My father's side, especially, there as a family of musicians, Hawaiian musicians and composers, that very much formulated just the importance of both music as an art and music as a storytelling form. And then on my mother's side, I come from a line of storytellers. My grandfather was just a fascinating storyteller. He could make you focus on him putting butter on toast, and you would just be so drawn in. He was so charismatic, such a great storyteller. So I come from two lines of storytelling, really, in different forms. And I started dancing hula when I was very young. I've been dancing hula for Michael Pili Peng and Hula Halau Kano'eau since I was about 5 years old. And that became a huge part of my upbringing and a core to who I am as both a performer of hula and a musician, and how that influenced my love and performance of Hawaiian music and the storytelling that comes with that. And in high school, I thought I was going to be a basketball player like my sister. I thought I was going to be a soccer player. I had this whole career that I thought I was going to build for myself as an athlete, and got brought into the theater my sophomore year by our theater teacher, who was like, "Okay, you did that. Now come, you're supposed to be over here." So that was how I fell in love with theater. And around that time, I learned that I could even go to school and study music, which was not something I ever thought I could do. And a lot of that was born out of having this moment of representation. I was able to see a video of Dame Kirite Kanawa singing, and she looked like me, and this beautiful Maori woman singing opera. And I'd never seen that before. And that was huge. It was huge for me. And I decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to study music. And I came to UH and I studied music, and I ended up doing an emphasis on Hawaiian music. And it all led all of these interesting paths. And I look back, and a description I often use for the kind of the route that my life took is that's like a lei. It's a stringing of flowers, and all of these experiences are flowers that kind of make up, and the flowers don't always match, and some of them seem like really random, but they were a necessary flower that eventually led me to HTY. And I started working with Honolulu Theatre for Youth, and part of it was with the community theater, Kumukohua Theater, working with Moses at a previous job I had, and it all led me to this place and this work that is the ultimate accumulation of of all of these things and the places that I came from to, at the end of the day, be a storyteller and use all of these different mediums and work at a place like Honolulu Theatre for Youth that allows me to use all of these mediums. And then it's like, oh, by the way, go make a podcast, figure out how to write for a screenplay. Also, we're going to do a TV show and we're going to tour here. I believe you can do it here. So yeah, that's how that happens.
Pōʻai's metaphor was one lei.
Yeah.
My metaphor is one patchwork quilt.
Woo.
So there's so many things that inform my journey as an artist and storyteller. One thing is like my family I just mentioned, all around me. I grew up listening to stories of extended family members, spending time with my Filipino side of the family, cousins, second, third cousins. This is actually from my Uncle Kaholo. And this is from a family reunion in the 80s or something. So I love having my family around. And that is where I learned humor. This is where I learned storytelling. It's just other people in my family being funny and me being like, oh, I want to do that one day. And I was also just blessed growing up to have different experiences that exposed me to different forms of public speaking or performing arts. You know, I grew up Catholic. My preschool, I remember I played Joseph in like the pageant thing. You know, a mass is a very, like, can be a very performative ritual kind of thing. And it was in choir in elementary, marching band in high school. One of my best friends in high school was also very introverted. I was kind of an introverted kid like Moses too. He for some reason signed up for acting class. I don't know if it was for a girl or something, but he was in a production of The Jungle Book. And so I went to go watch it my junior year. And I'll never forget this because the young woman who was playing Mowgli started crying on stage. And I was like, oh, those are real tears. And I was so moved by this story of this person who was adopted, right, by this family of the animals. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sign up for that. So I signed up and took classes with Mr. Fujioka. And then I went to Leeward Community College and learned with the late, great Dr. Paul Cravath, and just kept doing things with different people in the community, in the improv community, community theater community, and then HTY community. And yeah, I just, those are my origins.
It's so beautiful to hear these stories, and thank you for sharing them. I can relate to having to create your own work. You know, I'm biracial, Asian American, and I don't think I've ever played that, you know? And so I'm very envious that you have a community that you can perform, you know, and any mixtures of race, you know, in Hawaii. I'm very, very happy about that happens. But I'm also very curious about what you think about the evolution or the development of Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian representation and media in theater in your lifetimes. I think that there is more representation, right? But what do you think?
I believe fully that we are in, this is like wave 3 of a Hawaiian Renaissance. And I think we can look at the different rounds of the Renaissance, the first Renaissance with Kalakaua, the Golden Age, and the resurgence of hula in that time, and all of the wonderful things that were born during the kingdom in that round. And then the second Hawaiian Renaissance in the 70s, and this is about hula and about voyaging and these traditional practices and our language coming through so strong. And it was just it's such a wonderful time. My father grew up in that period, and it was amazing. All of a sudden, it was not just cool to be Hawaiian, but it was pride in being Hawaiian, which was something he didn't grow up with. And so these two big waves, and I think we're in a third wave right now that's really specifically in the arts. And it's just such an exciting time. And hearing you, Dmae, say that you've not been able to perform what you are, I have had the absolute pleasure, love, luck, whatever it is, and responsibility, I suppose, of I have been able to play me in so many ways after having not seen myself represented in, especially in Western art, that since I have moved to Oahu and joined our community theaters, I have played Hawaiian, I've played Hapa, I've played my Chinese parts. I have been able to be me, which is so exciting. And a huge part of that is the people that carved the way. And I look to Moses as someone who has definitely carved the way. Writing out of necessity is guided us, led us on a path so that we are both also writing out of necessity, but we're being supported by someone who has done it so well and beautifully and holds us to a high standard, which is wonderful because in this time of growth and change and we are being heard. A local boy from Hilo is the director of a huge Marvel film that the first 10 minutes is entirely in Chinese. That would have been unheard of before. And it is like, I would start crying. It is such an exciting time to be involved in our arts and be there. And I can only be grateful to all of the people that were swept aside and asked to act with an accent and asked to be something, a caricature of themselves. We don't have to do that now. And if we're ever asked to do that, we can stand up and say no. And that was never an option in some cases for others. So we are the lucky generation. And now we're making this Renaissance keep on going. Jump on the va'a because we are going.
You from Big Island or Maui? From Maui, you know.
I think he's from Maui. We don't want to say anything. But...
I thought he was from Hilo.
He from
Where
Hawaii.
Do you live in Hilo?
He from our kingdom, bro.
It's kingdom of Hawaii right there.
Representation is interesting. Because when I think about that, in how those conversations translate, I suppose, or what they mean here in Hawaii, it's a little different from the Asian American Pacific Islander experience in the continent, yeah? And a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of going to, or I saved enough money to go to Oregon Shakespeare Festival, had a blast, watched Cambodian rock band, and for the first time in my life, well, in a visceral way, I think experiences at Kumukuhua, I've experienced representation in a visceral level, but I didn't really think about it because I was like, oh yeah, these are other entertainers just doing their thing, you know, that makes sense. But being in Ashland and like knowing about like the vibe of the place and like who purchased tickets, you know, and watching Cambodian rock band, I'll never forget in that theater, there must have been like maybe like 5 to 10 other people of color in the audience, and like watching that show and a couple other shows, and the whole cast Asian American, most of that crew Asian American, and then that play is just killer too. I was just blown away that you could do something like that in theater, you know. It's just one of those things that I'll never forget because there's just such a beautiful experience in exploring this father-daughter relationship through an Asian American lens. And I think for here in Hawaii, you know, where my brain has been at for the past couple years has been, how do I make more opportunities for myself and others by writing, you know, like Moses, creating things. How do I make a writer's room? How do I get in the writer's room for NCIS Hawaii? Also, how do I become a showrunner and make my own show? Because those kinds of producer level, I guess, behind the camera planning, long-term thinking, I think is the future, I suppose, or part of the future conversation. That's where at least my brain is at.
Yeah, mahalo, you guys. Okay, keeping this brief, I'll just start off by saying, you know, I'm the older guy in the room. I've been doing this for a couple of decades, right? And I told you that when I first started doing this, it felt like it was just me. But now you're looking at 3 professional Native Hawaiian actors. There's a 4th of us, and we are we make up the majority of the only professional theater in Hawaii and one of the most respected children's theaters in the nation. You know, and I say that not to brag, but just to let you know that we are, you know, we're doing the work that needs to be done in the way that it needs to be done. You know, much of that, you know, changing the makeup of even HTY. Much of that is due to our leadership at HTY, and I'm so thankful that Eric Johnson is our artistic director, and he has the vision to create the type of environment and tell the types of stories for our community that need to be told. But part of that also is, you know, to take a little bit of credit for that, to be one of the ones to be ready, right? Pōʻai talks about this renaissance that's happening. There are movements happening all over the world right now where people want stories told a certain way, authentically from the people of those communities. The time is now for that. It's a good thing we're ready, right? I'm not the only one. At the University of Hawaii, Haileopua Baker, she has now a theater program that's entirely in Olelo, Hawaii, in Hawaiian. It's mind blowing, you know, what she was able to do. She did that because she was ready, because she knew that this day was going to come, and whether it came or not, she was going to be doing her thing. So there are a number of us that you know, we will take the knocks or whatever and the rejections and whatnot, but we're not going to give up, and we're not going to tell the stories that we don't want to tell. We are going to, in lack of a better term, force the landscape to change, which is happening now, you know. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, there's much more representation. There's still more, you know. I'm still saying no to a bunch of projects, and when people come up to me and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Did you really think that I would work on your project that you're trying to do, having not consulted anyone from our community until this very moment, you know, as opposed to having us be a part of the development of your piece, right? So all that to say, not all that to say, but I'll also say that what we're doing it not for ourselves, right? We're doing it for the future, for the community, for everyone else, you know? And so I'll continue to hold, like what I said, hold the youngins to a higher standard. I'll also continue to encourage the work that the younger generation is doing, because it's important, it's vital that we continue to evolve and grow and change for our lahui, for us, for the people. Yeah.
Still, Pacific Islander representation out in the continent or the mainland is still not, you know, I mean, it's just very, very minimal. And I think that's why shows like NCIS Hawaii are important, because for many people, you know, that's where you're going to get some exposure, right? And I was wondering, Moses, your character on the show is one of the few, or actually probably one of the lead characters that speaks in Hawaiian dialect. Did you have to push for that, or was there a conversation about that?
So there's I guess a trust that has developed between me and the directors of the show. It's sort of unspoken, but what happens is I give them what I think it will work. And if there's something that doesn't work, because you know the pigeon that I use in that show in particular is pretty heavy, and there are times when they feel that, okay, I think a mainland audience from the continent won't understand that, so I will you know bring it back a little bit. So it's kind of like we feel each other out. They let me do what I feel is right, and if they feel if it's too much, then I'll bring it back. That's the way I work. If I'm ever in a place where I feel they're forcing me to bring it back too much, then I've said no to many projects, you know, many big projects, which logically is not the wise thing to do as a working actor. But I'm gonna stay true to who I am and what I know needs to happen. So yeah, but for the most part, you know, I try to develop that trust between myself and the creators of this piece, who are largely, you know, not from Hawaii. Maybe there's you know a few consultants, but you know we're dealing with people that are trying to get things authentic, and you know it's hit or miss. Sometimes they do a good job, sometimes they don't. but it's important for me to at least try to build that pilina, that connection with them, so that we can work this out and continue to have representation in Hollywood. But then also, sorry, getting back to what Sean was saying, you know, we are part of these Hollywood shows, but we're really working towards creating these things ourselves.
I totally get that, because that's where the true representation happens, and the authentic representation happens when you're in the writer's room, where you're producing and directing, definitely. I am also curious, Pōʻai and Sean, you're both music composers. And Pōʻai, in your bio, you have a statement about how word choice influences and perspective influences your work. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that's fun hearing somebody else read that bio out loud. So mahalo for that. I actually originally kind of conceived of that very specific wording from my previous employment, where I was working. I used to work at the Hawaiian Mission Houses, Historic Site and Archives. And that's a complex story. I think part of me wanting to really focusing on that is because I was immersed in working in a space and a part of Hawaii's history that's very complex and nuanced and oftentimes ugly. I know that Hawaii is not alone in being a nation that has been occupied and has ugly parts of our history. Trying to figure out wording on this one. The perspective and knowing how to tell the story to the right audience. You have to pick and choose sometimes what lesson you want your audience to learn. And part of that is knowing who your audience is. Very huge part of that. And I think I got my earliest training in that as a keiki, as a child, being told our legends, specifically the legend of Hi'iaki Kapoliopele. It's an epic story that it can take days to go through the entire thing. It's a beautiful, complex story. And when I was young, I was told one variation of it because I was old enough to only understand a certain part of it. And as I got older, I learned more and more, and it was the same story being told to me, but I was learning more. I was a different person. The person who was telling it was different. I was in a different setting. And so I learned from an early age that that's not mistruths. I'm not being told a wrong version of a story. It is a perspective, and there's a purpose for telling that story that particular way. And I brought that into the work that I was doing at the time, where I was working previously, and I continue to frame my work that when I'm right on my own, when I write music, when I'm writing for the highway, even I have to remind myself, okay, who's my audience for this? What lesson is it that I actually want to have come across here? And yeah, so I think that's what I mean by perspective. It really does matter. I could tell a story to Sean and Moses at the same time, and Moses will come away with a different thing than Sean does because they're two different humans. And I may have told the exact same story to them, and they will take away something differently. And I think just recognizing the human nature of storytelling. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And, you know, that also translates to writing for theater or film too. You know, selecting those words are so important. Sean, I was actually interested also in this song you wrote about Patsy Mink. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Man, that was a journey. It was so an unexpected journey. Oh, that's what I forgot to mention, Dmae. One of my influences, huge influences, Tolkien. You can ask Pōʻai. The other day, I was improvising a rap on the second age. And anyway, Tolkien and Lewis, Narnia, Middle Earth, those huge universes, like, were so influential and are still influential to me. Yeah, unexpected journey. So I got in contact with Kimberly Basford, is a local documentary filmmaker. and a few years back she made a doc about Patsy Mink. So we got connected. I got connected to one of Patsy's cousins who's still connected to us, who's a puppeteer, Calvin, who we just saw at lunch, who's so generous and so skillful in his art. And yeah, I was trying to figure out initially, the assignment Theater Works was commissioning different BIPOC artists to write songs about historical BIPOC figures from where they're at. So at first I was like, maybe someone Hawaiian, I don't know. And then there wasn't really anything clicking, or, that's very like, ooh, clicking or whatever. But something about Patsy Mink clicked with me. And I think it's probably just, she reminded me of my grandma. Also, I didn't really know much about this very, very influential politician from her era that, we hardly hear about her anymore, except like there's a big park named after her in central Oahu, which is a great honor, but what's that story? And then, so I learned more about her. I bought there's an old bumper sticker over there that I found on eBay. And I just became a huge fan of Patsy, and I nerded out. There was these, we did a show a couple years back about the plantation era Hawaii. And so I started researching about the music of that era. And I used something from that research in the song. It's very brief in the Patsy Mink song. I learned about Hole Hole Bushi, which are like songs that the Issei, the first generation sugar plantation workers would sing, right? And one scholar, I forget his name, I think it's Garrett Hongo, would call them Buddha Head Blues. And I love that description because they are blues, they're about, there's a melody I used in the beginning of Think Mink on a fake shamisen. And what is it? It's like, Hawaii, Hawaii, Toyo, da na 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 na. And it's like this character singing, shall I stay in Hawaii? Shall I return to Japan? I don't know what I should do. These Issei, these first generation people that sacrifice so much, and some of which were lied to or got a weird deal, but like gave so much, and those who stayed gave so much for the generations, anyway, it's so short. It's just an Easter egg in the beginning of the song, but I was just like, okay, it's just important. I want to like add this thing, and the rest of it is like a, like 70s kind of like think. It's on twusa.org if you want to check it out. It's also featured in one of our episodes of The Highway. So that was
thank you. Yeah, we'll link to it. So if people don't know who Patsy Mink is, I suggest you Google her right now. So, there's a section in Stories of Oceania about the importance and love of words. I love that section because we were just talking about words, but I'm also wondering, as we close this, what were some of your favorite moments?
Things that stand out to me are Junior being Poon, talking about Satawal. The scene about this is melancholy Sean coming out. The scene about the tomb and the nuclear testing was so heavy. And also the music I composed for the piece, I got help from Peter Espiritu and John Senior. And John Senior lent some nose flutes to me that were Anthony Natividad, who's a famous nose flute player. And it was just really special to be able to include his mana and his self in this very special story. So those are moments that stood out to me in the piece.
The writing process was so much fun. At early on, we talked about these meetings that we had way in the beginning with Auntie Meleana Meyer and Uncle Visoni and Tal. That was just these amazing people, great Pacific Island artists who are just, pushing pushing us, you know, laying foundation so that we can come in and create things. Luna really, really loves those people as well. So there were those two meetings that we had, they were all on Zoom. And I think part of it too is that by that point we were like stuck in lockdown part 2 or whatever. And it was just so lovely, even via Zoom, to see these people that we love and hear what they have to say and be like, they were like full cheerleading us, which was like such a wonderful, wonderful feeling. So that's one of my favorite memories. Sean talks about the in the sequence, the ghosts and the tomb. I ended up falling into quite a rabbit hole doing that research, finding out these things. And I thought I knew this story. I thought I knew what happened to our cousins in the South Pacific and the bombing of Bikini Atoll and all of the other islands that were bombed. And it was that was hard for me to dig through, and I was grateful for the experience to kind of light that candle and see what was behind that door and learn more and share that with especially the youth. Our children need to know what happened to those places. And then a goofy thing, my Manu moments, I wrote this song that Manu sings, this music video that she creates. It was really just a poem that I wrote. And I was just talking about like the Maori gods and the gods of Aotearoa. And it turned into this like super inspired by Fat Freddy's Drop and Tiki Ta'ane and these musicians that I love from Aotearoa Taika Waititi. I was just watching like all of his movies like in a row, all of it, the films that he made, those Maori films that he's made. And Chesley just being like, yeah, go for it. And I just like hammed out hard, and it was so much fun. I enjoyed every second of that. It was great.
I hate to say the whole thing, but the whole thing. So you know, Sean mentioned that he knew very little about Patsy Mink, but through the art that he created, you know, in the process, he learned so much, right? That happens almost every time with me, you know, creating a piece. You know, I now have more ancestors than I had before. You know, you develop such a pilina, such a connection with these people that although you're not blood descendants from these people, they've become my ancestors, right? With this piece, it's the discoveries that we made about all of these people that are in our community that I was not connected to before, and now I am. You know, hate to keep going back to the bomb section, but that, you know, when Pōʻai came with that research, and we went, I followed her right down that rabbit hole. And although it was difficult, and although many tears were shed, you know, just learning of those stories, I now have an understanding of why things are the way they are in our community right now, and how I don't have a connection to the people that I'm next to on the bus or walking down the street. I know why things went how they got to where they are now, so that then healing can take place, right? So I guess that's what I love about this, is with so many projects, is just how much I've learned and how much I can now change, right? Through both the art that we create and the people that we're becoming as we grow personally from our own work. So I guess that's my favorite thing. But I will say that at the very end, when we have all those bracelets, that was actually, we made those. And so we brought in a weaver, a good friend of mine who is Native Hawaiian, but he helped the Marshallese, people of Marshallese Islands reconnect with some of their weaving traditions, and he's just a master weaver. He came in and he gave us all a workshop so that we could all make our own bracelets. It's not one of my talents, I'll tell you that. I struggle a bit with making my bracelet, although Pōʻai and the rest they did a wonderful job. I couldn't get my little shell to stay in, but regardless of how good or bad my bracelet was, just that time that we were actually able to spend together, because as we said before, we were mostly not together creating this, right? We could only be together in just small groups. But for this, I think we actually included it at the very end. We went outside of the theater where we could safely be together, and we wove our bracelets, all of us, and it came out the way they came out. Luckily, our costumer made a few extras so that mine didn't have to be featured, but I still love the experience.
Yeah, I actually love that ending part where you're all making the art together. You know, that was really lovely. We're running. We're running a little bit long, so I want to go ahead and save some time for. I'd like to ask you your final thoughts or future projects, whatever you want to say. We'll just go around and what's ahead in the future and final thoughts.
I'll go first. I was just trying to remember a positive, nice light memory from the one thing I really loved during Stories of Oceania was Des, who plays Inise. During filming, in the original script, she said, "I'm proud to be Fijian." And then when we were filming, she said a different word, which is how I think it was Kaiviti. I was looking it up. And I was like, oh, maybe we should include that. And that's what made it in the end product, which I thought was like a little nice detail. Some things that are coming up for me in a couple weeks, I'm doing a new show that I'm creating with a friend, Bonnie Kim, at Oahu Fringe Festival in Chinatown. That is about us. It's called Waves of Generations, and we're talking about our Korean grandparents, like that guy. And I just got my costume in, and I'm very excited to dance and tell stories and do that, all that jazz. Yeah, and I also do improv, musical comedy. So this Friday and other once a month, kind of, I do a show called Sean Choo's CD Release Party, which is not a real CD. It's a made-up show that is based on audience suggestions, where I make songs based on the suggestions, and I pretend it's a real CD. So those are things coming up for me.
we got two huge projects coming down with HTY and Inamona, which is Moses's theater company that Sean and I are a part of, and it is all about Hawaiian storytelling. So one is I'm sure he'll dive more into it, but I'm very excited about it because it is huge, like 2-year planning to create art that's both going to be in our theater, within the space and within the historic grounds that we are around, and down into our downtown district and the financial district and these areas that people drive through every day to get from one place to another. But there are just layers of history and story in that space, and bringing the youth through it, and then eventually the public and parents and families and whomever wants to come through. And that's going to be an AR project. That's going to be really, really, really cool. I'm very excited. And the other projects that we're actually going to be lucky to tour with is talking about Hawaiian healing. So I'm just thrilled about the projects that are coming through with HTY that I'm lucky enough to be involved in, and Inamona. And just a final note, I think, with this show, with Stories of Oceania, and the other things that we've been producing and will continue to be producing, both through HTY and works with Inamona and such, and all the other AAPI productions that are coming out in the world. It's such an exciting time, and I'm so happy to possibly make a difference in children's lives, that they can see our stories, that they can see our faces, hear our songs, whether they are Pacific Islander or not, whether they have a connection to their ancestry in the Pacific Islands or not, that these are their stories as well. And we are here and we're telling them, which means that they are also there and they can tell their stories. Everybody has a story to tell. I'm excited to see the ripple effect that this will have into the future.
Yeah, and for me, I have too many projects going on. I have to stop doing many projects. I mentioned some very exciting ones where, born out of the pandemic, we're actually going to take the audience outside of the theater and use augmented reality. And so we've been engaged in some pretty cool conversations with some tech people, most of which goes over my head, and I'm hearing all these terms and trying to, get them to help us tell tell our stories using what they know. I'm reminding myself to stick to what I know as a theater maker and let the tech people do their thing, but I do have to have an understanding of that. So that's a project that's very exciting coming up. We've got the HIF, the Hawaii Film Festival, coming up next week, and I have 2 films in that, and I believe you can watch virtually. So one of them is called The Last Hawaiian Sugar, and then the other one is Waterman, which is a documentary, a pretty amazing documentary about Duka Hanamoku, which is as you, I don't know if we mentioned, but I did a one-man show about Duke, and that's sort of what's being featured in this film coming up. There's that, and there's a bunch of TV shows happening. I'm doing the NCIS thing, but I film this Friday for an HBO series that's coming up soon, and let's see how that goes. But I have a pretty good feeling about that in terms of how they're representing Hawaii and our people. So far so good, fingers crossed. But I think it's going to be a good one. So I'll be looking for that in the future. Yeah, and final thought from me is just to mahalo you and everyone who made this conversation happen. We did this a while ago. We did we created Stories of Oceania a year ago, and so it's been a while since we were able to come together and talk about the work that we did. It was just nice to be in the room with Pōʻai and Sean, and just to remember these things and relive certain moments in my brain, how things went down, and to remind ourselves about the work that we create and why we create our work and the impact that it's having. So thank you for opening up the space for us to just talk story. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to learn more about this HBO project, but I know sometimes you have to keep that stuff under wraps. So I'll be.
Oh, it's called Kenui Road. Kenui Road. So I don't know when it's coming out, but that's the name of it. So at least that's out there. Yeah.
Wow, that's exciting. That's exciting. Thank you. So Moses Goods, Sean, Joseph, Choo, and Pōʻai Lincoln, thank you so much for this conversation today. Thank you for the beautiful work you all wrote together, you all created together. Thank you.
Mahalo for having us.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
So Stories of Oceania, you can see it. You can follow the link on this page. MediaRites and Theatre Diaspora are presenting this wonderful 1-hour family play produced by the Honolulu Theatre for Youth. And you have an opportunity to see this work, and just go to the Eventbrite page that we have on this Facebook page, or visit MediaRites.org and join us for the rest of today, November 20th, and Saturday, November 27th, for panels, workshop, readings, and videos from Portland's Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities. So you can find the schedule and links on this very page. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Mahalo to everyone. Thank you.